Anyone who knows me or my content for a while knows that if there's one franchise I had to name as the sickest to ever grace the world of gaming, my answer would be Devil May Cry. A series that doesn't have that many games in it, but almost all of them are absolutely stellar action classics. There was a solid stretch where these were the games I was playing and replaying basically on the daily, and I had a self-imposed obligation to mention both it and Sly Cooper in pretty much every video. But it has been a spell since I was last hardcore playing DMC, so what better way to get back into the world of sick, stylish action than a detailed retrospective? So yeah, let's do it. The weirdest thing is, Devil May Cry is something I've played so much of over the years that it feels like it's been in my life forever, and I guess technically it has. I mean, I was less than a year old when it was first released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001, but what I meant was, I can't really imagine a time where I hadn't played it. But that was only 6 years ago, which is a cursed thought in and of itself. But yeah, I've told this story in the past. My first playthrough of the game Metal Gear Rising convinced me I was going to be a fan of the sick action game genre, and so a few months later I decided to pick up some new games. One of which was the Devil May Cry HD collection on the PlayStation 4, which had DMC 1, 2, and 3, and the other was the PS4 port of Resident Evil 4. Neither of which I had played before. I didn't end up getting to RE4 for another 2 years, but we all know what came of that once I did. When I first mentioned this in a DMC video 5 years ago, the comments told me how ironic it was that I got DMC and RE4 on the same day, given how the story behind Devil May Cry was that it started development as Resident Evil 4, but was straying too far from the franchise's roots, so they eventually reworked it into an original franchise. And then the actual RE4 was a massive departure from the series' roots anyway. But yeah, I just thought that was a funny coincidence. It took me a while to actually get through this game, as I can discuss later, but once I actually did, I was pretty impressed by how this game held up and compelled me to keep playing it through its combat and atmosphere. From there, I just played the games in order and got to experience Devil May Cry 5 the day it came out in 2019. Not gonna lie, across all 6 DMC games, I think I have a combined 1,000 hours in them. Needless to say, I was quite hooked on it. This is why I'm doing this. Not just because I felt like running through the whole series again, but also because the last time I did, it was my second playthrough of DMC 1 through 4 and my first playthrough of DMC Devil May Cry. With so many more years of playing and replaying these games, I could offer something much more substantive than I did before. So let's waste no more time. I'm gonna grab this PS2 copy of Devil May Cry and replay this absolute masterpiece.
Let's rock, baby.
And I meant that too. DMC 1 gets slept on a lot in my experience. The game is usually given its dues as the grandfather of the modern third-person action genre. Countless combat-heavy games that have been released since Devil May Cry were in some ways influenced by it, but to the non-hardcore fan, DMC 1 is usually thought of as this fun at times but clunky game that served as a good blueprint for later entries. It does make sense. I mean, this is the same series as Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 5, which I think are some of the greatest games ever created, so DMC 1 is not going to compare to them, and I'll echo similar sentiments to this game being clunky later in this video, but over the years, I've just really come to love this game for what it is. Not everything about it is great, but I think the game is pretty darn cool, to say the least. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Devil May Cry stars Dante, son of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta. Sparta was a demon who fought against the demonic hordes from the underworld. Sparta married a human woman and they had 2 sons, Dante and Virgil. But Sparta is long gone now. And some decades later, Dante runs a demon hunting shop called Devil May Cry, trying to find the demon who caused the death of his mother and his brother. But then a superpowered woman named Trish falls out of the sky and crashes through the door to tell Dante that Mundus, king of the underworld and enemy of Sparta, is rising again on Malay Island, Mundus also being a prime suspect in the deaths of Dante's family as the duo arrive on the island to stop him once and for all. From there, DMC doesn't have that much story, you just explore this castle fighting demons until things ramp up in the third act. But that was no concern of mine when I first played this game. I mean, like most games I try out for the first time, I wasn't paying attention, so I had no idea what was even going on in this game until the near end of it, and only actually learned the plot in my second playthrough. I don't know if anybody else is like that or not, I just know that it takes me a while to get invested in something with no prior connection to the material whatsoever. But anyway, once you get into the castle, you can see that Devil May Cry still has a lot of Resident Evil's DNA. The game got reworked a lot conceptually when it became its own franchise. I mean, the whole idea of fighting demons as a character named Dante was added in later, but I'm talking about some of the game's core components. That is where you can still feel some RE influence. You don't just get dropped into some sick-ass fight scene. The very first thing that happens is Dante getting trapped inside the castle's main hall. The exit is sealed and the door on the right is locked and needs a key to be opened. The door in the middle can only be opened with 45 red orbs, so you need to run around the main hall and collect them, which gives you the ability to test out the controls in a totally safe environment, like seeing what moves you have, how jumping off a wall works, and the camera system. Like Resident Evil, there are fixed camera angles, but since the environments are fully rendered in 3D, the camera can move around and do dramatic shots, but you just can't control it yourself. If you want to end this section quickly though, here's a fun fact. If you climb up on top of this statue and reach the top of the thing it's holding, you get a bunch of red orbs at once. But either way, you get the red orbs you need to go find the key and use it to open the locked door. DMC1 has this kind of exploration throughout. That is the way it reminds me of the early RE games the most. You're trapped in this castle for pretty much the entire game, and you need to keep finding ways to progress. Though, I wouldn't really say that intense exploration is a core pillar of this game. It's pretty linear and has a level-by-level structure. But looking around and inspecting things will be a part of the game, is all I mean to say. Like this lion statue requires the Pride of Lions to be accessed, which is only 2 rooms away, and when you find it, you need to quickly go outside and interact with this shrine before you can grab it. Simple stuff like that. The first key sets the stage for this exploration since it's pretty easy to find, but it's guarded by this demonic puppet, and that's when the game really gets going. Devil May Cry is different from a lot of other combat games in that you can't block incoming attacks and only get a small dodge roll. Instead, this game is about going on the attack and learning how to dodge attacks with the right timing. But obviously, you don't start the game with a bunch of tools at your disposal. All Dante has is his father's sword, Force Edge, and his twin pistols, Ebony and Ivory. But with this, you have enough combos for the game to feel pretty satisfying out of the gate. Force Edge has 3 combos, an aerial attack and a launcher attack. You can increase the variety by mixing them up since you aren't locked into a combo once it's started. You can cancel it and do another attack. So I like to do combo 3 where you stab the enemy a bunch of times, but then instead of the finishing move, I launch the enemy in the air and shoot them before slamming them to the ground. The pistols have infinite ammo, so they're great for keeping enemies in the air once they're launched, and are good for doing chip damage to your foes. The puppet enemies you fight in the early missions are perfect for practicing the combat system since they usually fight at close range and have enough durability to allow for some combo experimentation, even if you don't have that many unlocked at the start of the game. The fundamentals of the combat in this game just work really well. Though, obviously, since this is a game from over 20 years ago, there is some jank involved. The camera does a pretty good job keeping track of the action, and when there are objects in the way, they'll go semi-transparent so you don't lose track of Dante and the enemies. That's pretty smart, but sometimes the angles are insufficient. Like this part in Mission 6. This is already one of the most annoying enemies in the game as it dives towards you and does massive damage, but the camera angle makes it so I can barely see the thing. And sometimes when the screen changes angles, the controls get messed up. DMC1 only uses the analog stick for movement, so when you're moving forward and the camera is behind Dante and it switches to in front of him, suddenly which direction on the stick forward has shifted, so the controls get locked up for a second. This doesn't happen in the heat of battle, but when exploring the castle it can be irksome. But like I said, the game's fundamentals are so well done that it doesn't really bother me. What ties the whole game together is its sick sense of style, something you can quantify via the game's style system. When fighting enemies, a letter will appear towards the top of the screen, starting at dull and ending at stylish. You get a stylish ranking by killing enemies without missing a beat. This is one of the harshest style systems in the series because when an attack is considered complete, you only have about 2 seconds to land another one before the style grade just disappears completely. So you not only want to beat enemies, but you also want to do it in clever ways to get that grade up, like launching an enemy and keeping them suspended in the air with bullets while you get to the next enemy you want to fight. But if you want to keep getting great combos done in this game, you need to upgrade your gear. And this is where the game gets even cooler. Just 3 missions in, Dante nabs this sword called Alistair, and they could have just had him, pick it up or whatever. Instead, Dante just gets stabbed straight through the abdomen and rises up with his demonic superpowers and then claimed the sword like it was nothing. Alistair becomes your default weapon from this point forward, and it grants Dante an important ability, his Devil Trigger. Once you have this sword, you'll see these runes underneath the health bar, and when 3 of them are active, you press a button to access your demonic powers and become even stronger, dealing more damage and becoming resistant when taking hits, making it all the easier to get more stylish grades in combat. But it was also around Mission 3 when you can start to afford some upgrades. You find these things called divinity statues, and this is where you can use your amassed red orbs to buy things like health and Devil Trigger refills, or upgrades to your weapons. The most crucial one for Alistair is the Stinger. This sends Dante flying towards enemies from far away, and it's one of the most important abilities in the game because many attacks like the Helm Splitter fling enemies away. The Stinger allows you to quickly close the gap and keep the combo going. And you want to do that because the higher your rank is, the more red orbs the enemies drop when defeated, which further allows you to buy more upgrades like the Air Hike, which gives Dante a double jump, or the Vortex in the Air Raid, which gives Dante flight and electricity powers when using his Devil Trigger, which are really powerful against bosses. But not all your weapons are required unlocks like Alistair, though. Many of the additional guns Dante gets are things you just find in the castle, like the shotgun that's found pretty early in the game. Nothing too remarkable about it on its own since it's just a shotgun, but man, it feels really powerful to use. That sound effect just really sells how much of a punch is packed into each blast. And then Dante can just do repeat shotgun blasts while wielding it with one hand. Needless to say, he's a pretty cool dude. Something you witness firsthand with these early boss fights. Mission 3 introduces the Phantom, this giant magma spider thing, and Dante's just like,
What a big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
Or in Mission 4 when you get to this bedroom and Dante sees his own reflection walk out of the mirror with ominous music backing him, and Dante is unfazed and just goes,
This stinking hole was the last place I thought I'd find anyone with some guts.
The mystery man's name is Nello Angelo, and the in-game files saying he's a warrior with the same fighting style as Dante. He doesn't speak any words, but with an entrance as dramatic as this, you know the guy means serious business. Okay, well, if you don't know what you're doing, this game is actually really difficult, I swear. The funny thing is, these early bosses remind me of the fact that I thought this game was really long when I first played it. Numerous moments had me completely stumped on how to get through it, and I'm pretty confident it took me like 2 or 3 play sessions to get to the first boss with Phantom. Maybe some of those were like 10 minutes, but still, it's funny for me to look back on because this game is actually really short. You can get to the first Phantom fight in hard mode in under 15 minutes, and then the game is like 3 hours long if you know what you're doing, but also taking your time. But yeah, first time around, I got my butt royally kicked by this game. The enemies and mini-bosses don't joke around and do a lot of damage. And the bosses, if you do get hit, also really pack a wallop, and to top it all off, the game uses a lives system. Yellow orbs are collectibles that give you an extra life, and if you lose them all, you go back to the menu and have to load the save file. The game is pretty punishing on the first run, but I don't think it's done without purpose. The cutscenes show how Dante is super powerful and confident, but when you first play as him, you might get your ass kicked 6 ways from Sunday. I think it encourages you to really learn the game and become the badass the character is. So when you finally overcome a tough boss, you're like, hell yeah, as you send the overconfident boss monsters back to hell and Dante gives them a cheesy send-off.
You're right. I'm his son, Dante. Sweet dreams.
Once you've defeated Phantom, you have all that you need to escape into the castle courtyard. This is where you start getting some new equipment, like this grenade launcher that a dead body was holding onto. This thing might seem kinda useless at first because the rate of fire is really slow, but check this out. If you shoot a grenade and then dodge roll, you can instantly fire another one, making the weapon infinitely more useful. You're welcome for that sick tidbit. Made it go from a weapon I never used to one that I often have equipped. The most important upgrade you'll find in Mission 9, though, is Ifrit, burning gauntlets that Dante uses to beat up demons. This one has some drawbacks, mainly that I don't think it has much mobility. If an enemy is too far away, I think it's difficult to keep a consistent combo going. And I don't like how air hike is only available for Alistair, when double jumping should just be something Dante can do no matter what weapon he's using. And I also think it takes too long to switch weapons. Pressing the R3 button activates the switch, and I think the animation takes too long when if you just instantly switched between them it would allow for faster combos and just keep the pace going. But still, this weapon can be mighty satisfying. For starters, you can charge up every punch and kick, and that actually freezes the style meter temporarily and does a wicked amount of damage, especially in your Devil Trigger form. And then many attacks are brutal, like Kick 13. With the DT active, this becomes an onslaught of attacks. Or this ground pound where Dante creates a wave of fire all around him. The weapon isn't perfect, but man, it's really fun to use. At this point, the game starts introducing a lot of new enemies that are some of my favorites to fight, like the Blades, these lizard dudes that jump up from the ground. Getting past their shields and beating them up is a lot of fun, but it's even more so to use some bizarre tactics on them. Like how Mission 11 bunches up a ton of them in this underground passage, and you can use the fact that Dante can jump off of enemies to your advantage to do this. You can do something similar to these advanced puppet enemies called the Fetish? Man, these dudes really lost big time at the demonic naming convention. But anyway, if you have air hike and the shotgun, you can really obliterate these guys in uber stylish fashion and it never gets old. This phase of the game sees Dante battling Griffin, this giant bird enemy, and you face off against it 3 times. Though I must admit, I think these bosses are kinda weak. He just spends so much time in the air that it can be difficult to actually do cool attacks on him when blasting it with air raid is a lot easier. Then the second encounter is just a mess as he's flying around in the background and you keep getting launched in the air. For this fight, I have no shame in using the holy water item on it, which clears enemy health bars at a huge cost to your rank. But this boss isn't the jankiest part of the game, I'm afraid. Right around the second Griffin battle is also when the player is introduced to these first-person swimming controls. Honestly, I don't find them too difficult to get to grips with. You just press one button to swim forward and move the stick to turn around. But at the same time, swimming around and shooting enemies with an underwater needle cannon isn't that fun in a Devil May Cry game. Swimming is the main gimmick of Mission 13, which is also the easiest mission in the game as it lasts like 45 seconds. It's pretty difficult not to get an S rank on this stage. But while I'm on the subject of the game's jank, there are other examples to point to. Like how the PS2 version, specifically in the West, has these backwards controls where jumping is on triangle, and every other version and all the sequels have triangle as the main attack button and X as jump, which is infinitely more comfortable. Now one might wonder, why then play the game on PS2 if you think the controls are better elsewhere? And my answer is that while I'd rather casually play this game on Switch or PC, I try to play games for videos in their original form as often as possible to show off the game as it once was, since remasters of older titles tend to lose detail and effects in the translation. And it wasn't really that much skin off my back, because when playing on an emulator like I did for the video, you can just reconfigure the controls in the emulator menu. But what's funny is that the game itself comes with an alternate control setup, but not one of them is the Japanese original, nor can you just configure the buttons yourself. But if we're talking about the in-game controls, nothing will be the bane of your existence quite like the platforming. These are just so stiff because once Dante jumps, you're locked in until he touches the ground or you're redirected with a double jump. Platforming is not often required in DMC, but when it is, it will be incredibly awkward to do in a way that I'm not sure the footage is properly conveying, but trust me, it's bad. And while talking about parts of Devil May Cry that I find somewhat clunky, the secret missions are on the list. These are bonus objectives you can find in missions, and I do like a lot of them in concept, particularly the ones that require an understanding of the mechanics on a deeper level than just playing through the game normally. Like the one where you need to get 2 enemies to kill each other while they try to kill you, or needing to use the enemy step to get high enough to reach the goal. But many secret missions are just kinda random stuff, like stepping on 100 enemies in under a time limit, or just spamming the same enemies over and over again. One of the worst regular enemies in the game are the Shadows, these demonic felines that shapeshift and fly all over the room. Dealing with one of these things is somewhat simple, you use DT bullets to reveal the weak spot and use charge punches from Ifrit to do the most damage. But several secret missions just make you fight a room full of these guys, and they just do so much damage that it gets really annoying. I spent over 20 minutes on this secret objective in Mission 15 because it was 3 of them in a cramped room when I was playing on hard mode. But the secret missions are worth doing since you get rewarded with blue orb fragments. If you collect 4 of them, you get a full blue orb, and that increases your health bar slightly. You can buy a few blue orbs at the shop, but most of them come from secret missions and by finding them in the overworld. Some of these can be kind of obscure, but I think it gives you the extra incentive to really look around the castle and use your various abilities to get them, and I think that element was handled pretty well. Anyway, by the end of the second act, you'll find the last projectile weapon in Mission 15, the Nightmare Beta. This is a charged laser gun that ricochets around the room. I like to use this while fighting the ice enemies in Mission 17, but I don't often equip this. I don't even use it on the final battle against Griffin, which occurs right after this. I already went into how I don't find these particularly compelling bosses, but at least afterwards the cutscene is cool. Dante actually shows concern for his enemy by saying that he's too wounded to keep fighting, but Mundus appears in the sky and just kills Griffin like it was nothing, which only further convinces Dante that Mundus is the worst of the worst.
Mundus. His heinous ways make me sick, killing even his own, like they were nothing. He's the one that took the life of my mother, my brother, and Shirley. My mother used to always tell me that my father was a man who fought for the weak. He had courage and a righteous heart. In the name of my father, I will kill Mundus.
There really aren't that many cutscenes in this game, but the team did a really good job making Dante an iconic character, giving him a range of emotions in this one game. Though the fact that there aren't that many cutscenes is probably for the best, because the ones that are there are really funny and not often for reasons that I think were intentional. I mean, it's a 20-year-old game from Japan. You'll get a couple of lines that just don't sound right. Although, funny thing is, this game, like many older Capcom titles, were only written and recorded in English with Japanese subtitles alongside it for the Japanese version, which is kind of surprising to see. But yeah, there's a lot of odd dialogue in this as a result. Like how the opening monologue is like,
"But somebody from the underworld woke up to justice and stood up against this legion alone."
Or when Dante says,
You were the first one to know about my vengeance. It looks like I'm getting closer.
like, bro, what are you talking about? But then there's a lot of goofy stuff that happens, like Trish busting through the doors at Devil May Cry and attacking Dante and being like, wait, I'm not your enemy. I know where a super secret bad guy is hiding and I can take you to him. And then he just trusts her because she somehow looks like Dante's deceased mother. Definitely not a setup, I swear. So yeah, the cutscenes in the story can get pretty hokey in this game, but honestly I wouldn't have it any other way because I just think it's really entertaining to watch, with the right gameplay to story ratio so that it can still be fun to watch Dante roast his foes rather than being annoyed by the oddities of the game's writing. In the final act of the game, Dante returns to the castle, only now it's nighttime and things are much more sinister. The lights are all out and new mysteries and enemies are lurking around every corner. I think Devil May Cry is a really unique atmosphere, perhaps another remnant of it being an RE game at one point in its life. The gothic inspiration behind the castle just has a spooky vibe, contrasted well with the bright red badass you play as in the game who tackles these numerous foes in style. Not to say that later games don't have an atmosphere, as DMC 3 and 4 and even 2 win points in that category, but there's something about Malay Island in this castle and how they lit each room and the music and the enemies that just gives DMC 1 a standout atmosphere. It's also here at the end where Dante battles Nello Angelo for the final time, and it's revealed that he's actually Dante's long-lost brother Virgil. I remember when I first got this game like 6 years ago, I was actually pretty surprised by this, specifically because now Virgil is this super iconic character from Devil May Cry 3, so learning that he was actually a boss in DMC 1 who was corrupted into being a servant of Mundus just made me curious to see what Virgil was going to be like when I got to the third one and see how he got from that to this. Dante knows it's Virgil because Nello Angelo just disappears upon defeat and drops an amulet, one of the two that Dante's mother had and gave to each of her sons. But with both amulets combined, Dante can use them to awaken the true power of Force Edge, transforming it into the Devil Sword Sparta. And with an opening cutscene like this, you'd expect a pretty sick weapon, but unfortunately I'd argue the DSS is actually the least useful weapon in the game. It has a bigger range than Alistair, but it has no devil trigger until the final boss, and you can't switch to Ifrit while using it, so I just switch right back to Alistair the second I get this weapon. But my issues with the endgame don't stop with the final weapon unlock though, because these are my least favorite missions to go back to when replaying the game, generally speaking. Starting with the fact that the last boss Dante has to repeatedly face off against is Nightmare. It's a blob of evil energy and you need to hit these light switches to give it a solid form. It can be easy to dispose of, as charging punches and kicks do a lot of damage, but it's the kind of boss that spams attacks all over the screen and dodging them can be a real headache. And then you might get plunged into the underworld to fight some familiar enemies. Apparently they're a manifestation of Dante's trauma, but I just don't think it's a fun boss at all, and it only gets more annoying with each repeated fight. In the middle of the final nightmare fight, Trish betrays Dante, but when he still wins anyway, he saves her from a crumbling pillar and tells her off.
Dante!
Don't come any closer, you devil! You may look like my mother, but you're nowhere close to her! You have no soul. You have the face, but you'll never have her fire!
Goofy line reads notwithstanding, you then press on to the final level. We have to find a way to open the door to Mundus' chamber, where Trish saves Dante from Mundus but is seemingly killed, firing up Dante to kill the king of the underworld. The first phase of the battle is honestly kind of a wash. I mean, you have to battle Mundus while flying in the air shooting at it to charge up your DT gauge, and then you can release a dragon that eats up Mundus' health bar. I don't usually care for final bosses in games where the mechanics get changed up like this at the last second. I mean, this isn't a test of what you'd learn by playing Devil May Cry, so it feels really out of place. Something I could forgive if it was an easy final gameplay switch, but with how much damage Mundus does, even on normal mode, it can be something you'd get stuck on. If I have a lot of health left before starting the second phase, I usually don't have much trouble getting through this one though. You just need to avoid taking hits and falling in the lava and you should be good. And once you think Mundus is down, Dante mourns the loss of Trish, who wasn't so bad after all, as Dante lets all his emotions out in what will become the franchise's biggest meme.
I should have saved you. I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
But there's no time to reflect on that legendary line read, as the final mission forces you to escape within a time limit before Mundus shows up for a really easy final round where you can tear through his health bar with the Vortex move. And then Trish shows up, suddenly back from the dead, to give you one last power boost before sending Mundus back to hell.
It looks like we have a winner.
Jackpot!
Yeah, I guess Dante's tears brought her back to life or something, and her own tears show him that she's no demon since devils never cry. So they escape the island together and she officially becomes Dante's sidekick, ending Devil May Cry.
Okay, great. Where's the place? We'll be right there. This one has the password. Sounds heavy.
Okay, let's get it over with in 10 minutes. Can't let a single one of those suckers live.
5 minutes.
More than enough.
But the fun doesn't have to stop there though. When you beat the game, you unlock hard mode, and when you beat that, you unlock something even more devastating titled Dante Must Die mode, which lives up to the name as it's the hardest the game gets. But there's a lot of cool stuff you can see by playing the game on higher difficulties. For example, they spawn harder enemies in earlier parts of the game, like the more powerful puppet enemies. And since all your unlockables carry over, this allows you to go combo mad on them from Mission 1. Though I don't really like how it gives you tougher mini-bosses like fighting the powerful scissor dude in place of the Shadow in Mission 4, since Shadows were already my least favorite enemy, and I enjoy fighting this enemy even less. Playing the game again rewards you for collecting all the blue orbs before, and not just because your health bar is bigger, but because you can find yellow orbs in place of the blue ones, meaning you can really pad out your life count like this. And there are cool speedrunning opportunities, like how you have Ifrit from the beginning, so you can just open this door in Mission 9, thus skipping the part where you have to find Ifrit, and also avoid the trigger for the first Griffin fight. You can't replay missions in Devil May Cry, you just have to replay the whole game, but with a game as short as this, it becomes really satisfying to go through the whole thing in 1 or 2 sittings, and trying to go for the best times in the highest stage rankings, which are based on your completion time and red orb count, though hard mode is usually where I stop. I can't do Dante Must Die mode without an unlockable called Super Dante, which gives you infinite Devil Trigger. Though for this video, I stopped playing hard mode at Mission 17 because this Nello Angelo fight is hard as hell. But I'm sure you get the picture. The designers managed to get a lot of content out of this game despite it only having 23 missions of varying length. And that is what made it so impactful when it released in 2001. Devil May Cry was met with a ton of praise when it came out because there just wasn't anything else like it. A true next-generation title. Critics had some issues with the difficulty and the kind of lame endgame and the control setup, but the game's scores were mostly high because of how good the game was. Everything from the visuals to the effects to the cutscenes, the gameplay, it was just legendary stuff. There weren't 3D combat action games like this before Devil May Cry, giving the genre a blueprint to work from that you can still see the effects of in games made today. DMC1 was just a legendary game like that. As I said at the beginning, I think DMC1 is kind of overlooked these days, which I think is sad because the game is so fun to play and has a lot of mechanical depth if you want to give it a shot. Of course, it's not going to compare to DMC3 and DMC5, but sometimes if I just feel like playing a relaxing game, I'll sit down on the couch, turn the lights off, and play through DMC1 on my Switch and just have a really solid time, despite its jank factor. I hope this video has shown off why I find this game so special in spite of the issues it does have, and why I think it definitely still holds up, regardless of how some of its sequels are all-time classics. But that's pretty much all I have to say about this game, so next we can talk about Devil May Cry's direct sequel, which is anything but. So I'll see you next time as we dive into why that is. Take care, folks.